Ready? You have a 15-minute talk, I think. So over to you. Good luck and enjoy your teacher conference experience.
Sound is dropping in and out, so I hope that's not going to affect us too much. Good evening, as it is here from Moscow, and my name's Edward, and I am going to be talking to you today about different ways of doing homework. First, I've got a question for you, which is, how do you normally achieve these things with your students? Memorizing vocabulary, practicing grammar, practicing exam tasks, and I've got an example there. Yeah, my webcam's dropping in and out, but if you can hear, there we are, I've just started it again. If you can put some questions in, some answers to these questions in the chat box, that will be absolutely great. I can see you're typing. It's always very unnerving to talk into the void this way, but hopefully, yes? Lovely. Write it on a copybook, yes? Being said, well, yes, certainly. Grammar with stories, very interesting, yes. Think of examples, of course, yes. Post-its, very nice. Okay. Those are some nice ideas. I'm just going to click onto the next next slide, which will show us some very ordinary ideas, shall I say. Flashcards is an obvious one for vocabulary. Games in class, that's one that we all know about. Using gap fills, yes, Paola has suggested filling in the gaps, exactly. Testing the students, of course. Vocab notebooks I haven't mentioned here, but that's a nice, straightforward one. And homework exercises, and those kinds of things. Some people have come up with some very interesting ones, which are things like grammar stories, but I've stuck with the more standard ones here in my list. What sort of problems are there with using this kind of approach? Well, I'm thinking that firstly, it takes up precious lesson time. I was casting around for the number of times you need to look at a word in order to learn it, and one number which came up, most people said there is no single number, but one example number was 20 exposures. They have to be meaningful exposures, and therefore, as that's rather difficult to quantify, then it's extremely difficult to quantify a number. But they suggested 20 exposures to a word to learn it. And on the Cambridge PET or preliminary list, there are 3,700 words. Multiply that by 20, and we've got, how many is it? 74,000, is that right? 74,000 exposures that we're hoping to give to the student, and of course, doing that in class is unlikely. Out of class, there are so many distractions. Certainly in this country, schools will often set every day, and they'll set 5 hours of homework. These are state schools. Students consider that homework much more important than my homework. That goes straight to the bottom of the pile. They're doing after-school clubs. Of course, my class with teenagers might be an after-school club for them, but they'll be going to lots of other after-school clubs as well. And other distractions, screen time. Everyone's got their phone, and I got this statistic, as you can see. In America, teenagers are spending 9 hours a day on their phone. Doesn't leave a great deal of time if they are using Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is the cool kids are using these days for 9 hours, they're not going to be doing my homework, no matter how much I set for them, or how upset I get if they don't do it. Another point, slightly tangential to this, our competitors are using non-conventional approaches, things like online teaching, and a lot of these have huge budgets to spend on online activities that, at least on the face of it, seem very interesting, and perhaps more interesting than these conventional techniques. Okay, this is something which crossed my mind. It's a non-copyright picture of a farm, courtesy of Sandy Millin. I got it off ELT Pics, and it represents a game I used to play on Facebook, a game called Farmville, and it is a game about running a farm. And how do you play it? The first thing you do is you have to plough up the fields, click, 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 click on 100 different squares of your field, and then you have to sow crops, click, 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 do that. Then you have to wait for several days while the crops grow. Then you have to harvest the crops, click, click, click on 100 squares of your farm. And then you have to sow more crops, click, 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 and then the whole sorry cycle repeats itself week upon week upon week, and that's the game. It's a very boring game, really. Very, very boring. Click, click, click. That's all you basically do. There's a small social element, but mostly it's just clicking on squares. But somehow, because of the way it was formatted, the way it was the game was set up, I became sort of addicted to it. And for several months I was playing this game, and until I realised what an enormous waste of time it was, and quit it. But this came back to my mind just a few months ago. If the most boring game in the world, I could be persuaded to play it just with a bit of psychological trickery, perhaps. Why couldn't we apply this to something else, which is perhaps not in itself very exciting, like learning vocabulary, but is extremely useful, unlike clicking on an imaginary farm? Of course, I'm not the first person to have this idea. Of course I'm not. And the students are using all of the things on their phones, and all of those websites are using this trickery as well, with Facebook lighting up a little red mark whenever anybody likes anything you've done, and Twitter is the same. It puts a little number in your title bar. Puts a little number in your title bar to remind you that you better check Twitter again. I was watching a video about gamification. There's a link here if you're interested in seeing it. This self-styled expert, Gabe Zickerman, was giving a talk at Google headquarters, and it was quite an interesting talk. But the thing which really struck me was this phrase: intrinsic motivation is over. He argued that websites are so good at attracting your attention and so good at keeping you hooked on them that actually doing something because you want to do it is kind of an old-fashioned idea. And if anybody wants to compete with it, they're going to have to start using the same techniques. Perhaps this is an exaggeration, but it was something that stuck in my mind. Another phrase which stuck in my mind, I couldn't find a non-copyright image to put for it, but Mary Poppins, the Disney version of Mary Poppins, mentions that a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. So if we can sweeten the pill of something that's not so exciting, perhaps, then we can make people do it. So this is a site that I'm sure many of you know. It's Quizlet. I've only been using it for a relatively short while, but it's already a kind of game in itself. You can stick on the learn mode, which is what I've stuck up here, and it starts by asking you for answers from a multiple choice to help you learn the word. Jane is a 30-year-old person, well, possibly, but friend, possibly not. Husband, definitely not. It's a woman, and this helps you to learn it. And the game part comes. Of course, if you get it wrong, then it starts feeding the same questions back to you. Then once you've got the multiple choice part right, then it will start giving you, and it's interactive, of course. It won't start doing this until you got it right in multiple choice. It starts asking for the actual word, something very basic there. But there's the pet word list. I mentioned it already, and there's a ket word list as well. And so I've fed the whole pet word list into Excel, well, or an Excel substitute. And got a team of people in the school to write gap fill sentences for them to exemplify the context of it. And now we've got a whole load of sets. It's 30, but 30 times 2 actually, because there are 30 topics, and then 2 different levels. They're the ones that are already used for ket and already used for pet. I've stuck them into this spreadsheet, and then the great thing is you can import that whole spreadsheet into Quizlet and start playing with it. I did that with the Lexis for pet. If you're interested in seeing it, there's a link to the pet one there. I did some grammar ones as well for gerund and infinitive, and some FCE sentence reformulation questions. And if you can read, if it's big enough on your screen, you can see a screenshot of the FCE sentence reformulation question there. Some of these really do lend themselves to a Quizlet type of format, but problems with these free resources are getting students to use them and getting teachers to use them, and making the activities feel like part of our school, not some kind of free thing, which of course, just some kind of trivial thing that's free. So we're in the process of setting up this Moodle site. Moodle is a learner management system. It's free, but you have to pay for the hosting, and it lets you embed the Quizlet into itself. You can see I've embedded it there fairly seamlessly, and you can open up the learner management system, go to the lesson which is relevant to your lesson today, maybe relevant to the unit in the book you're doing, and then we added to this a little test on top of the Quizlet, which this is programmed within Moodle using all the same data, which will, instead of, it's not a learning thing anymore, it's more of a testing thing. It will see how well you've learnt it. There we are, and it can all run in an app. You can see I've got the Moodle app there, and it all runs fairly seamlessly in this very nice slimline app. It's great for getting teachers to use it because you set it up, and then the teacher doesn't have to do anything. It's done centrally. The students are going to do it. It's self-access. The students are going to look at it. Teachers who are not so keen won't need to do it. Getting students to use it, we're providing rewards for completing the levels. You get, depending on how many you got in the test, a bronze or a silver or a gold award. And the idea is that having a gold award available, but actually quite difficult to get, will let students go back to the test and will encourage them to try again, to try to improve their grades on it. And the idea is to motivate the students using a kind of game to do this vocabulary learning activity. And then, of course, this is control practice. Some kind of freer practice would have to be done in class using some kind of production activity. So, just to summarize, putting embedding Quizlet into a learner management system and adding this reward element to try to encourage people to learn vocabulary, but also to practice grammar and to practice exam tasks. If you've got any questions, fire away. If you'd like to get in contact with me, there's my email. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Edward. It's nice to always see uses of Moodle and Quizlet in action. And again, well done on the timekeeping. I'm almost perfectly timed.